My friend Robert's bought his 2014 KTM 500 EXE round, and the countershaft seal is leaking from behind. So this video is going to show how to replace that. So a repair kit is available to replace all the necessary seals and bushes for the countershaft. That's the part number required for 4-stroke motorcycles. There's a different one for 2 strokes. So these are all the parts that are contained in the countershaft repair kit. There's a new seal, an O-ring. There's a couple of different bushes. The 14500 came fitted with this one, so I'm going to replace it with this one. For certain applications, you'd probably need to use this one, but for this repair we're not going to use that one. And then it comes with a new sprocket bolt and washer. So it's always a good idea when you're changing the sprocket or doing a repair like this to use a new bolt and washer. And to press in the new seal, I made a special tool which should press in the seal nice and straight and also press it to exactly the right depth. So I'm going to be using this. So you need to remove the front sprocket. So I've moved the chain guard out the way by taking out this front bolt and loosening the rear one. Then you can just swing it up out the way. And now I'm going to remove the front sprocket bolt using an air impact. If you have a 2-stroke, all the models up until 2016 they have a spring clip, so you need some spring clip pliers to remove that. But all the 4-strokes have a bolt here, and 2017 and newer 2-strokes also have the same system. And it should come off fairly easily like that, and then you just pull the bolt off, the front sprocket off with a chain. Next we're going to remove the chain slider because it interferes with the seal here, so it's easiest just to take it off. It's only held on with a couple of bolts. We're now ready to start disassembling the seal. We've laid the bike out so engine oil doesn't come out of this area. If you don't want to lay the bike over, you can drain the engine oil, but in this case it's a bit easier just to lean it over. The first part of disassembly is to remove this bushing, and it's just a slip-on fit, so it comes off fairly easily. I'm using this pick tool. You could use a flat-bladed screwdriver if you don't have one. We're now ready to remove the countershaft seal, and I'm going to be using this seal removal tool. I've seen on YouTube a lot of people who don't have a tool like this. They'll drill a hole in the seal metal part, put a screw in there and then pull it out. But I think it's a lot easier and quicker if you have a tool like this. So, and the seal comes out pretty easily. And with the seal off, you can remove the old O-ring. Just pulls off. Before you install the new seal, you want to make sure the area where the seal sits is nice and clean. So remove any dirt on the outer area of the case, and inside you want to make sure there's no grit. So I'm going to use a cloth and some parts cleaner. I don't recommend spraying parts cleaner inside. There's a bearing just here, so that's not a good idea. What I do is spray some onto a cloth and then wipe it. Okay, so I finished cleaning it, and I've been especially careful to clean the case inside where the seal sits, and also on the countershaft where the O-ring sits. I've cleaned off any dirt in there, and the countershaft splines as well. When you're installing the O-ring, you obviously got to put it over the countershaft, so if there's any dirt on here, and it'll get pushed down onto this surface and maybe create a leak. So just make sure everything is nice and clean But like I recommended, do not spray parts cleaner directly into this area. As you can see, there's a bearing here, so that's not a good idea. Okay, before you install the new seal, it's a good idea to use some grease on the lips of the seal. So there's two seal lips, so make sure they're greased. I like to use silicone grease, or you could use regular grease. I don't think it really matters that much what it is. You don't need a huge amount, but you want to coat them. This will also help the seals not tear when you install them. And also you want to use some grease on the O-ring. Before I install the new seal, I wanted to show you the press tool and how the seal fits on it. So the press tool has this lip here, which is machined to hold the oil seal exactly in place and center it. And then it has an opening which fits on the countershaft. And the bore is precision made, so it can't wobble around on the countershaft very much, and will drive the seal in nice and straight. And then on the 4-strokes, the countershaft is threaded, so you can use a bolt like this, screw it in, and then holding the bolt in place, you simply tighten a nut, and that drives the seal into the case, and it should drive it in nice and straight. And then it has a stop here, so it'll only drive the seal in flush with the cases. On 2-strokes up until the 2016 model, the countershaft isn't threaded, so you can't use a bolt like this, but you can just drive it in. So I'll be supplying the tool with a separate tool, so it can support both 4-strokes and 2-strokes, and the newer 2-strokes are the same as the 4-strokes, so you can use the bolt. So one tip I have is to apply some thread lock, medium strength thread lock, around the outer seal surface where it seats in the case. You don't necessarily have to do this, but it is a good idea, particularly if the case is a little bit worn or scratched in places. It'll help seal it, seal in the oil, and also hold the seal in place. So I'm going to put a little bit of thread lock on. This is Loctite 243, and just run a little bit around the outside. You don't need much, and as I said, this is medium strength, so it won't cause any issues when you come to replace this. I wouldn't recommend using a high strength thread lock, but I think it's a good idea, and will guarantee there's no leaks. So I'm just going to do it like that, and then you can thread in the bolt into the countershaft. And it doesn't need to go in that far, probably about 3 turns or so, and that's fine. And then lower down the seal onto the case and make sure it's lined up nice and straight, so 90 degrees to the cases. And then you can wind the nut down and then start pressing in the seal. So I'm going to use a socket to hold the bolt in place, and then an open-ended wrench to drive the nut down. So it's a good idea before you fully drive it in just to take the driver off and make sure the seal is going in straight, and that looks great. So I'm going to put the seal driver back on and continue to press it in. Okay, so it's almost fully seated now, and the way the tool is designed, you'll feel when the tool touches the cases, it'll become much stiffer. So just stop tightening then and confirm that it's fully seated. I can see the tools touching the cases, so I'm going to undo it now and take the tool off. And there you can see the seal is flush with the cases. There's no damage to the seal at all, so it's driven it in nice and flush. And I'm just going to wipe off the excess thread lock from around it. Be careful not to get any thread lock on the actual seal, so wipe away from the seal. And that looks really nice. Okay, now we can put the new O-ring on, and as I showed before, I've already put some silicone grease on this. One thing you need to be careful of is not to damage it when putting on the countershaft because of the splines. They're a little bit sharp, so just do it very slowly and carefully, and be sure not to damage it, and just push it down, and then just push it down carefully. Now I'm ready to install the bush, and I'm going to use a small amount of silicone grease on this as well. You can use regular grease, it's up to you what you use. Okay, so and you can just push it down into position and it should go on very easily. Okay, so now I'm ready to reinstall the chain slider, and it's a good idea to use some Loctite medium strength on the 2 bolts that hold it. So I'm using Loctite 243. And just put a small amount on the bolt and reinstall it. So there's one here and one on the bottom. Okay, so now I'm ready to reinstall the front sprocket. One tip I have is to put some moly grease onto the splines of the countershaft. This will minimize any wear on the splines. And then you want to try and get the grease coverage where you want to get it down into the valleys of the splines. So I'm just using a toothpick to push it down into there. And then just push on the front sprocket. Should go on fairly easily if it's lined up correctly. And then you can wipe off any excess moly grease. And before you reinstall the countershaft bolt to hold the sprocket in place, it's a very good idea to clean out the threads. The bolts, you have the thread lock in there, so there's always some old thread lock left. So what I do is I use a thread chaser like this to clean out the threads. You'll find if you don't do this, there is a chance that you can't torque the bolt correctly, and in an extreme case it could mean that the washer which presses up against here isn't actually doing anything. So I always run a tool like this through the threads and make sure it's nice and clean. And the rebuild kit, it comes with a new bolt which is already coated in some thread lock, but I don't particularly like this type of thread lock. Prefer a medium strength one in this application. So I'm going to clean this off with a wire brush and put some Loctite 243 on here. And it comes off relatively easily. Okay, so I've cleaned off the Loctite that the bolt came with, and I'm going to use some Loctite 243 medium strength for this installation. I find using this Loctite, it holds a bolt in place, ensures it doesn't come loose, but when it comes time to change the sprocket, you can still take the bolt out relatively easily. If you use a red Loctite, it's extremely difficult to remove, and in some cases you find you can break the bolt, so I think it's a little bit risky using the red Loctite. When you install this, it's got the Belleville washer, domed washer, and you want to make sure the washer is centered and it's not pinched to one side, or you won't be able to install it correctly. So that looks as though it's lined up now. Okay, so now I'm ready to torque the sprocket bolt. This needs to be torqued to 60 Newton meters. It's quite high, and to do that you need to hold the sprocket in place. There's a couple of different methods you can use. One is to put a rag in the rear sprocket between the chain and the sprocket and hold it. I've tried doing that. I don't really like it that much. It doesn't hold it very steady and puts a lot of strain on the chain. So the method I prefer is to apply the rear brake. And if you have a helper, it's easy. They can push the brake down. If you don't have a helper, you can use a clamp like this on your stand, press the brake down, and that locks up the rear wheel solid. So that's what I'm going to do today. Okay, so now I'm ready to torque the bolt. I've set my torque wrench to 60 Newton meters. And you can torque it pretty easily. So the method of using a clamp on the rear brake pedal works really well if you're just on your own. Okay, so I've reinstalled the sprocket guard, and that's the repair complete. As you saw, it's a pretty easy job to do if you've got the right tools, and certainly having the countershaft seal repair tool made it a lot easier and allowed me to install the seal perfectly first time.